Hello, welcome to my final self-assessment and critical lesson analysis for the course Fieldwork and Clinical Practice in Reading. I have titled my presentation as Becoming an Adaptive and Reflective Literacy Teacher. This presentation will cover my career stages, teacher knowledge, and reflective practice through literacy tutoring. This slide represents the foundational stages of my teaching journey and the early experiences that shaped my development as a literacy educator. During this time, much of my understanding of teaching aligned with what Day describes as the declarative and technical stages of teacher development. I was focused on learning classroom management, implementing curriculum routines, and building confidence as a new teacher. My experiences in the UNLV professional development cohort and working alongside mentor teachers provided important foundational support as I learned instructional routines and classroom structures. In first grade, my literacy instruction relied heavily on scripted phonics instruction through Saxon Phonics and a scripted curriculum, where I developed consistency in instructional delivery and foundational understanding of literacy instruction. Moving into third grade became an important transition point for me professionally because I no longer had a tightly scripted curriculum to follow. Instead, I had to analyze student strengths and areas of needing growth more independently and making instructional decisions based on assessment and observation. This shift pushed me towards more intentional, targeted, and responsive instruction and began moving me into what I now recognize as an emerging stage of pedagogical content knowledge. Although my instruction at this stage was still developing, these early experiences created the foundation for the reflective and adaptive literacy practices that would continue to grow throughout my career. As I reflect on my current career stage, I now recognize that my professional identity aligns much more closely with what Day describes as the adaptive and reflective stage of teaching development. Rather than viewing teaching as the implementation of fixed routines or programs, I now approach literacy instruction as a dynamic, responsive, and continually evolving process grounded in reflection, inquiry, and student-centered decision-making. A defining characteristic of this stage has been continuous professional growth and a commitment to lifelong learning. Over the years, I have intentionally sought opportunities to deepen both my theoretical understanding and instructional practice through professional development, leadership experiences, mentorship, graduate coursework, and collaboration with literacy experts. National Board Certification in Literacy was a transformative experience in my professional journey. The process required deep reflection, analysis of student work, videotape teaching, and justification of instructional decisions through the lens of the 5 core propositions. That experience fundamentally changed how I think about teaching. I became much more intentional about reflective practice, responsiveness to student learning, and instructional decision-making grounded in evidence and student needs. My work as an English language learner student success advocate also expanded my understanding of multilingual and culturally responsive literacy instruction. Through that experience, I learned more about best practices for multilingual students and had opportunities to both attend and provide professional development focused on literacy and language instruction. Working as a literacy strategist further strengthened my pedagogical content knowledge and instructional leadership. This role deepened my understanding of the science of reading, explicit literacy instruction, intervention systems, and assessment-informed decision-making. Training through letters and the core teaching reading sourcebook expanded my understanding of orthographic mapping, fluency, morphology, and language comprehension. Participation in the Literacy Lifeline cohort and serving as a Savvis Literacy Fellow also strengthened my professional identity as both a learner and a leader. These experiences allowed me to collaborate with national literacy experts, engage in ongoing professional learning, present professional development, and continue refining my instructional practices through collaboration and mentorship. My doctoral studies at the University of Nevada, Reno have further expanded my theoretical understanding of literacy, reflection, and instructional integration. Graduate coursework has challenged me to think more critically about theories of literacy instruction, research, and the interconnected nature of reading, writing, oral language, motivation, and cognition. Another aspect of this current stage is the role of mentorship and collaboration. I no longer see professional growth as something that happens individually. Some of my greatest learning has come through collaborative reflection, observing colleagues, participating in professional learning communities, and engaging in dialogue with other educators. At this stage of my career, I recognize that accomplished literacy teaching is not about mastering a single program or instructional approach. It is about continually refining my practice, responding to students thoughtfully, integrating research into instruction, and remaining reflective and adaptable throughout the teaching process. This adaptive and reflective stage has helped me move beyond procedural teaching towards a much deeper understanding of literacy instruction as responsive, integrated, and centered on supporting student growth, engagement, and independence. This timeline represents the evolution of my identity as a literacy educator. As a novice, I focused heavily on classroom routines, curriculum implementation, and delivering instruction effectively. As I transitioned into literacy coaching and instructional support roles, I began analyzing student literacy needs much more deeply and using assessment data to guide instruction. National board certification in literacy became a major turning point in my professional growth because it requires systematic reflection, analysis of student work, and instructional justification. Through graduate literacy coursework and tutoring experiences, my understanding of literacy instruction became increasingly integrated and responsive. I now view myself as a reflective and adaptive literacy educator who continuously adjusts instruction based on student needs, motivation, and ongoing assessment. This evolution reflects Day's description of teachers who continue growing through inquiry, reflection, and adaptive expertise. One of the aspects of this course that resonated with me most deeply was continually returning to Schulman's work on teacher knowledge and pedagogical content knowledge. That connection was especially meaningful to me because Schulman's ideas also connect directly with national board certification. Schulman was instrumental in shaping the intellectual foundations behind what teachers should know and be able to do, and the 5 core propositions established by the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards. Throughout this experience, one of the greatest areas of growth for me was developing a deeper understanding of pedagogical content knowledge, which Schulman describes as the ability to transform content knowledge into instruction that is understandable and accessible for learners. As a novice teacher, I often approach literacy instruction primarily through activities and strategies. As I progressed in my understanding of the science of reading, my thinking shifted significantly. I began thinking more deeply about why instructional practices work, how literacy systems connect, and how instruction must be adapted responsively based on student needs. National Board Proposition 2 states that accomplished teachers know the subjects they teach and understand how to teach those subjects effectively to students. That proposition strongly connects to Schulman's concept of pedagogical content knowledge because effective literacy instruction requires much more than understanding reading theory. Teachers must know how to make literacy concepts meaningful, scaffolded, and accessible for all learners. For example, my understanding of morphology has expanded significantly throughout my graduate coursework. However, simply understanding morphology myself was not enough. I needed to determine how to make morphology accessible for my students through morpheme study, roots and affixes, spelling pattern analysis, morphology matrices, and connected reading and writing instruction. Previously, I viewed fluency primarily as accuracy and reading rate. Throughout my science of reading studies, I developed a much deeper understanding that fluency includes automaticity, phrasing, prosody, and meaning making. That shift in understanding influenced my instructional decisions and led me to incorporate repeated reading, echo reading, poetry, performance, and phrase-cued reading to support expressive and meaningful oral reading. Our course studies into writing instruction also strengthened my pedagogical content knowledge. I understood that students often require oral rehearsal, collaborative discussions, graphic organizers, sentence stems, and word banks before independently organizing written responses. These scaffolds helped Isabella gradually move toward greater independence and confidence as a writer. This course reinforced for me that accomplished literacy teaching requires the continuous interaction of content knowledge, pedagogical knowledge, curriculum knowledge, and knowledge of learners. Effective literacy instruction is not simply delivering activities or strategies. It requires ongoing pedagogical reasoning and the instructional flexibility to adapt literacy knowledge responsibly in ways that support student understanding, engagement, and independence. This slide represents what pedagogical content knowledge looked like in practice throughout tutoring Isabella. On the left side of the slide, I included several major areas of literacy content knowledge that shaped my instruction: morphology, fluency, orthographic mapping, and writing instruction. On the right side of the slide, the visual represents how content knowledge, pedagogical knowledge, curriculum knowledge, and knowledge of learners continuously interact during instruction. Effective literacy teaching requires ongoing instructional decision-making based on student performance, engagement, and responsiveness. This slide highlights another area of growth for me. During this tutoring experience, monitoring student learning through ongoing assessment, reflection, and responsive instructional decision-making. This directly connects to National Board Proposition 3, which states that accomplished teachers are responsible for managing and monitoring student learning. Earlier in my career, I often viewed assessment primarily as something completed at the end of instruction. Through graduate coursework, science of reading, and national board work, my understanding shifted towards seeing assessment as an ongoing and integrated part of the instructional process. Throughout tutoring, I used multiple forms of assessment to understand Isabella's strengths, needs, and instructional responsiveness. On this slide, you can see examples of spelling inventories, fluency graphs, writing samples, and authentic student work that inform my instructional planning. The core phonics and spelling inventories help me analyze Isabella's orthographic development and identify patterns in her understanding of vowel patterns, affixes, and morphology. Rather than simply looking at correct or incorrect answers, I learned to analyze the types of errors she made and what those errors revealed about her developing literacy knowledge. The fluency graph is an important tool for monitoring growth over time. I began recognizing that fluency data tells a much larger story than words correct per minute alone. Isabella's oral reading began showing stronger phrasing, expression, automaticity, and self-correction, which reflected deeper comprehension and increased confidence. The writing samples shown on this slide also represent powerful assessment tools. Through her writing, I could see growth in organization, elaboration, sentence construction, inferencing, and application of spelling patterns. I could also recognize mistakes in syntax and sentence structure. These samples helped me understand how reading, writing, vocabulary, and orthographic knowledge were interconnected. Another shift in my thinking was learning to use assessment responsively rather than statically. Assessment was no longer just about measuring performance. It became a tool for instructional decision-making. Running records, fluency observations, writing responses, and spelling inventories helped me determine when to reteach, when to scaffold, and when Isabella was ready for greater independence. With continuous formative assessment throughout our tutoring sessions, it reinforced that effective literacy instruction requires continuous observation, reflection, and adjustment. Monitoring student learning is not separate from teaching. It is an essential part of responsive and adaptive literacy instruction. I'd like you to listen to Isabella read and notice her self-correction in this passage. I apologize for the feedback, but that's what happens when you're recording a recording.
Camels are big animals. They have long legs. They have a long neck. Some camels have one hump. Some have two humps. Most camels live in hot deserts. Deserts are very dry. They have lots of sand. Wind blows the sand around. How do camels live there? Camels can close their nose. This keeps sand out of their nose. Camels have many eyelashes. This keeps sand out of their fur. Out of their eyes. Fur keeps them cool during the day. Fur also keeps them warm at night. Camels store fat. Camels do not need food or water every day. Why not? Camels store fat in their hump. It helps them stay alive. Camels have thick lips. They can eat desert plants. That hell has sharp parts. Camels are made for deserts.
Wasn't that cute? Learning through reflection. This slide focuses on the role of systematic reflection in shaping my instructional decision making. National Board Proposition 4 emphasizes that accomplished teachers think systematically about practice and learn from experience. Throughout this tutoring experience, reflection became much more than evaluating whether a lesson was successful. It became an ongoing cycle of observing student responses, analyzing instructional decisions, adjusting supports, and refining instruction. The visual on the left side of the slide represents that continuous reflection cycle. Effective teaching is not linear. It involves teaching, observing, reflecting, adjusting, and growing from those experiences. Tutoring Isabella frequently revealed areas where I needed to reconsider pacing, scaffolds, and instructional supports. One area that required refinement was vocabulary instruction. Early in tutoring, I occasionally introduced too many unfamiliar vocabulary terms at once, which sometimes impacted comprehension and cognitive load. Reflection helped me become more intentional about pacing, repeated exposure, discussion, and meaningful application of academic vocabulary. Writing instruction also became an area of revision. I began recognizing how much oral language support Isabella needed before independently organizing written responses. Oral rehearsal, collaborative discussions, graphic organizers, sentence stems, and word banks became important scaffolds that supported stronger written expression. Further reflection involved scaffolding and cognitive independence. Through coursework and tutoring, I became increasingly aware that scaffolds should support movement toward independence. This aligns closely with Hammond's discussion of instructional scaffolds and cognitive rigor. As a result, I became more intentional about gradually releasing responsibility and creating opportunities for productive struggle and independent strategy application. The reflection process reinforced for me that effective literacy instruction requires continual responsiveness and adjustment. Some of the most valuable professional learning came not from lessons that worked perfectly, but from analyzing challenges, revising instruction, and responding thoughtfully to student needs. There were several important instructional shifts that refined my understanding of literacy development and literacy instruction. Over time, my instructional thinking became less procedural and increasingly integrated, responsive, and student-centered. As you can see on the left, my early understandings, and on the right, how that adapted and became my current thinking. My understanding of foundational literacy skills became more integrated. Earlier in my career, I often viewed phonics and phonemic awareness as discrete foundational skills taught separately from comprehension and writing. While explicit foundational skills instruction remains essential, I now approach literacy development as highly interconnected. Orthographic knowledge, vocabulary fluency, oral language, comprehension, and writing continuously influence one another. Tutoring Isabella repeatedly demonstrated how growth in one area often supported growth in another. Finally, my understanding of scaffolding shifted from simply providing support towards intentionally building independence. I became increasingly focused on helping Isabella internalize literacy strategies and apply them independently through gradual release and productive struggle. Overall, these instructional shifts reflect a more integrated and adaptive approach to literacy instruction, grounded in responsiveness, reflection, and student learning. Throughout this program, my understanding of how reading develops and what proficient reading truly requires has continued to evolve. Early in my career, I was ignorant of the science of reading. Much of my reading instruction had elements of phonics, fluency, and I knew the importance of reading aloud every day. However, my approach was more aligned with balanced literacy. After learning about the science of reading, and particularly the simple view of reading and Scarborough's reading rope, my thinking and instructional practice went through a dynamic shift. My instruction became more explicit and systematic. weaving elements from both the upper and lower portions of Scarborough's rope intentionally and interactively. Scarborough's reading rope is a meaningful framework for me because it illustrates how multiple strands of literacy development become increasingly interconnected and automatic over time. I appreciate that the rope emphasizes the interaction among phonological awareness, decoding, vocabulary, syntax, background knowledge, and verbal reasoning, and literacy knowledge. It helped me understand that there are constrained skills that eventually max out and unconstrained skills that continue developing throughout the life of a reader. Throughout tutoring Isabella, I repeatedly saw how these literacy systems influenced one another. For example, growth in orthographic knowledge supported fluency, while oral language and vocabulary supported comprehension and writing. Through graduate coursework and reflection, my understanding expanded even further through Duke and Cartwright's active view of reading. This model resonated strongly with me because it acknowledges that proficient reading involves much more than decoding and language comprehension alone. The active view incorporates bridging processes such as fluency, executive functioning, self-regulation, motivation, and engagement. I saw these factors constantly influencing Isabella's literacy development. Motivation affected her willingness to reread and persist through challenging tasks. Executive functioning and self-regulation influenced her ability to organize written responses and sustain attention during reading. Engagement increased significantly during poetry, performance reading, and collaborative literacy activities. This active view of reading helped me better understand why literacy instruction must be integrated, responsive, and multidimensional. Effective literacy instruction requires attention not only to decoding and comprehension, but also to fluency, motivation, oral language, writing, executive functioning, and student identity. This shift in thinking changed how I approach literacy instruction. I no longer view reading as a collection of isolated skills. Instead, I see reading as an active and interconnected process that requires cognitive flexibility, engagement, meaning-making, and strategic support. What Isabella taught me about literacy and learning. Motivation influences perseverance. Isabella taught me how strongly motivation influences perseverance during literacy tasks. I noticed that when activities felt engaging, meaningful, and achievable, Isabella was much more willing to persist through difficult reading and writing tasks. Poetry, performance reading, collaborative discussion, and creative literacy activities consistently increased her willingness to reread, self-correct, and take risks. On the other hand, when tasks felt overly difficult or heavily focused on correction, her persistence decreased. This experience reinforced for me that motivation is not supplemental to literacy instruction. It is essential to helping students sustain effort and develop confidence as readers and writers. Fluency supports comprehension. Working with Isabella deepened my understanding that fluency is closely connected to comprehension. Early in tutoring, her reading was often slow and laborious, which made it difficult for her to focus on meaning because so much cognitive energy was devoted to decoding individual words. As her automaticity, phrasing, and prosody improved through repeated reading and performance-based fluency instruction, I began noticing stronger comprehension responses and more meaningful discussions about texts. This experience helped me recognize that fluency is not simply about reading quickly. Fluency supports meaning-making, comprehension, and confidence. Next, oral language strengthens writing. Isabella reinforced how important oral language is in supporting writing development. I frequently observed that she could explain ideas verbally before she was able to organize them independently in writing. Collaborative discourse, oral rehearsal, sentence stems, and think-alouds became important scaffolds that helped bridge oral language and written expression. As we incorporated more opportunities for discussion before writing, her written responses became more organized, detailed, and confident. This experience reinforced the reciprocal relationship between speaking, reading, and writing development. As an English language learner, allowing Isabella to use all of her literacy skills in both languages helped her comprehend and communicate more effectively. Scaffolds must lead to independence. One important area of growth involved understanding that scaffolds should support movement towards independence rather than cause or create dependency. Early in tutoring, there were times when I unintentionally over-scaffolded by providing too much support too quickly. Through reflection and observation, I became more intentional about gradually releasing responsibility and allowing Isabella opportunities to struggle productively and apply strategies independently. Over time, I saw increased confidence, self-monitoring, and independent problem solving. Isabella taught me that effective scaffolding is temporary and responsive, with the ultimate goal of helping students internalize literacy strategies independently. Finally, she taught me that student identity affects literacy growth. This most powerful lesson Isabella taught me was the importance of student identity in literacy development. I began noticing that her confidence and willingness to participate changed significantly depending on how successful and capable she felt as a reader and writer. Performance reading, poetry, and opportunities for success helped strengthen her confidence and willingness to take risks. As her confidence grew, so did her engagement, perseverance, and participation. This experience reinforced for me that literacy instruction is not only about developing skills, it is also about helping students see themselves as capable, successful readers and writers. Triumphs, obstacles, and lingering questions. Some of our triumphs were increased fluency confidence, stronger writing independence, engagement through partner reading and poetry, and growth in self-correction. These great triumphs throughout this tutoring was watching Isabella's confidence as a reader grow. As fluency instruction became more engaging through poetry and performance, I noticed increased expression, self-correction, and willingness to reread difficult texts. Some of the obstacles we faced were all on me. Vocabulary overload, balancing support and struggle, over scaffolding or scaffolding too quickly, and frustration with writing. These challenges I encountered involved balancing scaffolding with independence. At times I realized I was providing too much support too quickly, which limited opportunities for productive struggle and independent strategy application. Here are just a few of my many lingering questions. One question I continue reflecting on is how to most effectively fade scaffolds while still maintaining student confidence and success. Throughout tutoring, I learned that scaffolds such as sentence stems, oral rehearsal, graphic organizers, and guided discussion were incredibly important for helping Isabella access complex literacy tasks. However, I also became increasingly aware that too much support can create dependency. I continue wondering how to determine the right moment to gradually remove support so students experience productive struggle while still feeling successful. This question has pushed me to think more intentionally about gradual release, student ownership, and helping learners internalize literacy strategies independently. I have appreciated the additional study and learning throughout this course that have deepened my understanding of best literacy practices. One important understanding I now hold is that literacy systems are deeply interconnected. Throughout tutoring, I repeatedly observed how fluency, orthographic knowledge, vocabulary, comprehension, writing, oral language, and motivation continuously influenced one another. Reading development cannot be fully understood through isolated skills instruction alone. As Isabella's automaticity and prosody improved, I saw corresponding growth in comprehension and engagement. I also recognize how strongly motivation influences literacy development. Engagement, confidence, and student identity are not supplemental components of instruction. They are essential to helping students persist through challenging literacy tasks and viewing themselves as capable readers and writers. This tutoring experience reinforced my belief that oral language is foundational to literacy growth. As human brains are hardwired for speech, we need to continue to build on this foundational strength through collaborative discussions, collaborative thinking, oral rehearsal, and dialogic instruction, consistently strengthening students' comprehension and writing development. Again, I mentioned one of my major shifts involving scaffolding. I know that scaffolds should support movement towards independence rather than create dependency. Effective instruction requires carefully balancing support with opportunities for productive struggle and independent application. Reflection is central to my instructional practice. I see effective teaching as a continuous cycle of teaching, observing, reflecting, adjusting, and growing. Some of my greatest professional growth came not from perfect lessons, but from analyzing challenges and revising instruction responsively. Finally, I know that assessment should function as a tool for responsiveness rather than simply evaluation. Monitoring student learning through writing samples, fluency data, observations, and discussion allowed me to make more intentional and individualized instructional decisions. Overall, this experience helped me recognize that effective literacy instruction must remain integrated, responsive, reflective, and deeply student-centered. As I reflect on this experience, I recognize that my growth as a literacy educator is continuous. Effective literacy teaching requires continual learning, responsiveness, and reflection. Moving forward, I want to continue designing literacy instruction that integrates fluency, word study, vocabulary, comprehension, oral language, and writing, rather than approaching literacy as isolated skills. I want students to experience literacy as connected, meaningful, and purposeful. I also hope to continue strengthening my own knowledge of morphology, orthographic mapping, vocabulary development, and disciplinary literacy instruction. These areas have become increasingly important in my understanding of how students develop proficient reading and writing skills. One important goal for me is continue to refine how I scaffold instruction toward independence. This experience helped me recognize the importance of balancing support and productive struggle, and that gradual release of responsibility is critical to student growth. I also want to continue using assessment responsively and thoughtfully, monitoring my students' learning through observations, writing, fluency data, and discussion, which allows instruction to remain individualized and adaptive rather than static. Beyond my own classroom and tutoring work, I hope to continue supporting other educators through coaching, collaboration, and professional learning. One of the most meaningful aspects of this program has been recognizing the importance of professional learning communities and collaborative reflection in improving literacy instruction. I want to continue fostering motivation, confidence, and positive literacy identity in students. This experience reinforced for me that literacy instruction is not only about developing skill, it is also about helping students see themselves as capable, engaged, and successful readers and writers. Ultimately, this experience helped me recognize that accomplished literacy teaching is not a destination, but an ongoing process of reflection, inquiry, responsiveness, and growth. Through this tutoring experience, I learned that effective literacy instruction is not simply about delivering strategies. It is about understanding students deeply enough to design instruction that helps them become independent, engaged, and confident readers. And here are my resources. Thank you.